We all know what generosity is. Generosity is when the haves give to the have-nots. It's the billionaire pledge, the big gift, the big check. It's stewarding your time, talent, and treasure wisely to share the excess with others. But if we have the right map, why can't we find our way? Christians tithe a far smaller share of their income today than they did during the Great Depression. For all the calls to stewardship and radical giving in recent decades, our wealth has skyrocketed, debt has expanded, and giving has plummeted. The Bible presents a much grander, richer vision of generosity. Generosity is central to the heart of God. It's not about money, and it's not about me. We're created in the image of the greatest giver in the universe. Everything we have is a gift. God made us by and for generosity. J.I. Packer calls generosity the focal point of God's moral perfection. God gave us life so that we could give life to one another. God gave us Christ so we could give Christ in us to others. This means generosity is not merely a luxury of the rich. It stands at the heart of our creation, our salvation, our purpose. That's why generosity is about so much more than money. Financial stewardship is not the capstone, but merely the groundwork of a generous life. If stewardship is like the law, generosity is like grace, surprising, extravagant, and always overflowing our petty calculations of what's possible, prudent, and deserved. The generous giver does not build himself up. He lays himself down to lift up another. Jesus did not just give us things. He gave himself to us and reconciled with us. Christ-like generosity is never merely transactional. It's relational. It's not just sending food to the tables of the poor. It's inviting the poor to our tables. And when we've learned to love deeply, relational generosity becomes sacrificial generosity. Like Christ, we make ourselves poor to make others rich. So what if we truly began to give our first and finest, not the least and leftover? What if we took righteous risks for a kingdom harvest? What if we tore down the walls and gave ourselves one to another? What if we were less intent on building a legend of greatness than forming a legacy by making others great? What if we gave not only our excess, but our essence, helping men and women become who God made them to be? See, generosity is not an obligation, but an invitation. An invitation to participate in God's redemption of all things and to know the great joy of the great giver as we live the life that's truly life.
Extravagant generosity. That's what we're going to talk about for the next 4 weeks. This series is one that's dear to my heart. We do something like this every year, and we're starting a brand new one this year. In the previous years, we've called it Be Rich, and where we're talking about being rich towards others, be rich in giving, be rich in your deeds, based on 1 Timothy, the 6th chapter. But I'm branding this a little bit different, and we're going to use this for our campaign for this year and for at least the next couple of years. We believe that this will help us in our own communities, and especially once you hear the message today. Extravagant generosity. I don't need to tell you what extravagant means, and I don't need to tell you what generosity means. But when you put those two words together, what we're talking about is exceeding what you're used to, exceeding what is reasonable, exceeding what we deem appropriate. And another definition is just lacking in restraint in spending, but we're talking about lacking in restraint in giving, and not for the church. I want to make sure that you hear my heart on this. We're not talking about giving to the church, although I believe you should give to the church, but this series is not about giving to the church. This series is about extravagant generosity, and only through the church if the church is actually doing that. And I believe a lot of our churches are not doing this, not enough. And we're excited to be engaged with our community, engaged in things that we do, and we doing this for what I call our nonprofit partners. That's what we're doing this for. All of the money that we will receive during this campaign will go to our nonprofit partners, and we'll share to you what some of those are. But remember, today is just the introduction, so I won't be able to give you enough about this today. We're going to talk about this for the next 4 weeks, but I do want you to hear my heart in this. See, early in the early fall, and I'm giving you some of this so that you can actually see it, but this time of the year is when a lot of our nonprofit partners are preparing to be a bigger blessing to those in the community for Thanksgiving, for those who they'll feed, families that they'll feed, even Christmas. And so we do this every year about this time, where we do a campaign and we begin to fund some of those differences. See, instead of actually going out and being engaged in those particular activities ourselves as a church, we choose to do that with other organizations that are organized to do that. And that's very, very different. When we were, just when we were brand new, didn't even have a building, we were setting up and tearing down every week. And we wanted to get involved in our communities, and we actually couldn't. The way we were set up, we couldn't do that. But we chose then to partner with other nonprofit organizations who already had a system in place, already had buildings, already had people, and then we would talk to them and find out what they needed, and then we would give to support that, and even add our own services as volunteers to help with some of that. And so we will explain some of that to you today. Some of those organizations that we've identified locally and even one globally we'll explain to you here. But several of those are here in Genesee County. We have Carriagetown Ministries, and we'll talk more about each one of these further along in the broadcast as we go next week and the following weeks. But these are some of the organizations that we have chosen to support financially and serving right alongside with them. Reconnections is another one where some of you remember we have several people who work with Reconnections, engaging with individuals who are being reintroduced back into society after being in prison, and getting them back acclimated to, and not just acclimated to the environment, but helping them with work situations, being life coaches. So we do a lot of that with Reconnections. And last year with Catholic Charities, we'll share with you when we talk more about that, but I know it was over a ton of food that we specifically collected, and we engaged and connected with the organization that I work with and work for, which is Lear and Lear Corporation. And we all, just GTM, we tracked how much we were giving, we weighed it. We gave more than 1 ton of food to Catholic Charities to be given. Another organization is St. Dunstan's Episcopal Church in Davison. This is brand new this year, but we're partnering. We look forward to partnering with them. They did some things with us this year for where we are giving a scholarship away to someone of color. Basically, they're engaging to be in diversity, which is just so wonderful. And so, and other smaller nonprofits that we support. But then we have one global nonprofit that we support, which is Christ Fearless Faith Ministry in Kenya, Africa. We support them. We specifically support their Joy Notes Children's Home. They're building buildings right now, and we support all of the work that they do there so that they can be a blessing to children. Bishop Muhindi, that's his heart, and he's gathered many people around him that's helping him to do that, and we support them in doing that. So many of you did a lot of this last year. This last year, 2020, was a difficult year, challenging for many of our partners, many of us, many of you, because of the health and safety concerns with COVID-19. But you assisted us in helping them to serve in our community. Even with COVID-19, these organizations that we supported were still out there getting it done doing what they needed to do. And so for those of you who supported us in doing that, I do want to say thank you again and again and again. But during this series, for the next 4 weeks, we want to tweak our focus. We want to, kind of zoom in on the community. We want to zoom in on people in the community. We want to zoom in on people specifically, because I believe that's who God zooms in on. Many times in our churches, we zoom in on our church people, but God wants us involved in our communities, because everybody matters to God, whether the people that we are serving think God matters to them or not. If God doesn't matter to them, we still invite you to join us for the next 4 weeks as we partner with these local and global nonprofits and focus on meeting the needs, the right now needs of people in our community and around the world. And this is how we do that. And so for today and the next 3 weeks, we will give you an opportunity to do that. And just as we did ever since we began, and we modeled this after the Be Rich campaign that's happening in many, thousands of churches that do a lot of this kind of work in their own communities. And we want you to engage with us and do this. And the goal is not, we don't have a specific monetary goal where we want to raise this much money. Our goal is this. Our goal is 100% participation. We would like for every single person to participate. And so we do have an amount, $39.95. It's just a figure that works, and most people should be able to do that. And we're asking you to do that. You can obviously do more. We have many people who do way more than that. But so that everybody can participate, we suggest this $39.95. If you can't give more, then do the $39.95 so that we can be a blessing to the people in our community and be the church. I'll do it like that, and be the church instead of just doing church. So as we get started in this message today, and remember, this is just the introduction, but one of the things I'm going to talk about today specifically is how money affects us. How money affects us. What is the purpose of money? Really, what I'm going to talk about today is the psychology of money. The psychology of money. See, money, we don't recognize it, we don't realize it, but money has such a hold on us, and we don't even recognize it. And that's what 1 Timothy is talking about, Paul who's talking to them. But I have some questions for you before we get into that. And this is my first question for you, and that's this. How do you answer this specific question? How do you, who would I be without my money? Who would you be without your money? So the question you want to ask yourself is, who would I be without my money? And that's however much you earn a month or annually or whatever. And also however much you've accumulated, whether that's over the years, however much you have in your bank account, in retirement, all of that. How do you answer this question? Who would I be without my money? And this gets us thinking about how money really has a specific place in our lives. And so who would you be as a person without it? Who would you be as a person without your money? Who would you be? See, one thing I know is that money and wealth has a way of moving our hope and our expectations from the provider of things to the things that the provider provides. And I have a big passion about this, but this, for many of us, that's what begins to happen. And it's a normal thing. It's a natural thing. You're not a bad person because this happened. You're not an ugly person because this is what happened. This is just what happens with money when we don't pay attention to what money is doing, whether it's money, whether it's wealth. But it has a way of slowly moving our hope from the provider of everything that we have, because God, everything that you have, everything that I have, God provided it. And we know that, but we don't think about that daily. We don't think about that, hourly throughout the day, which is one of the reasons why when you eat, which is one of the reasons you should thank God for your food. Because even though you worked and you got the money and you bought it and you cooked it, whoever did that, you need to recognize that ultimately the resources for all of this came from the Almighty God. And so money has a way of moving our hope from the provider of the things to the things that the provider provides. So my question to you then is, how has your hope moved, or has your hope moved? I believe, and honestly, my hope moves every now and then. You have to recenter it, because your hope will move and it will gravitate towards the things that you're actually able to provide for yourself, and to the level that you're able to provide them. In other words, your quality of life. And I have no problem with you and me both increasing our quality of life. For many of us, our quality of life was so bad. I can remember when we were very, very poor. I can remember when I didn't even know what the word commodities meant. And I'm not talking about on the chart of investments where commodities are things that you trade, but they called it commodities. And I could hear, don't know who the people were, but probably someone from the government, dumping bags of things on our porch. They wouldn't knock on the door. They dumped bags of food on our porch. And then we'd go out and get the food. And it was cans of peanut butter, dry. And if you know what I'm talking about, you can tweet some of this back to me, chat some of this back to me. How many of you remember powdered milk? They could give you powdered milk because you could just add water and then you had milk. But those big cans of peanut butter, powdered milk, crackers, Spam for meat, all those things, they would drop that stuff on our porch. And I don't know if you know, but I remember those days. And I remember times when I would talk to my, we as children, we didn't know how poor we were, but we'd ask mama for this and ask daddy for that. And a lot of times mama would say, boy, money don't grow on trees. And, and I used to wish it did so we could have some. But today and for the next several weeks, we're going to talk about what money does. And today specifically, how it affects us and what should be our real purpose with money, and how do we keep from gravitating towards the things and keep our hope centered on the provider of the things. How do we do that? And so we're looking in the book of 1 Timothy today, and this is where the idea of the Be Rich campaign comes from. Same place where we're getting the idea of extravagant generosity. And when we say extravagant generosity, we're not just talking about giving, extravagantly more than you can afford, but we are talking about an extravagant way of giving compared to what we have conditioned ourselves for. It is extravagant based on what we've conditioned ourselves for. But in 1 Timothy 6:18, Paul tells Timothy. Paul is writing to Timothy. And Timothy was one of Paul's proteges that he was training. And at this particular time, Paul had talked to Timothy. He had actually spent a lot of time with Timothy in different churches where they had established different churches, the Church of Corinth, Church of Ephesus, Thessalonica. Timothy was with Paul when he was actually establishing some of these churches. But Timothy was one that was young. And Paul talks about Timothy, in his letter to Timothy, he reminds him of his faith, his doctrinal training that he received from his mother and his grandmother. And one of the reasons that Paul talks about this is, Timothy's mother was Jewish, his grandmother was Jewish, but Timothy's dad was a Greek. And so when Paul looks at this combination of who Timothy is with Paul in Ephesus, where they're mostly Greeks, but there are some Jews there. But Paul is writing this letter to Timothy as Timothy is actually now the pastor of the Ephesus church. And Paul is telling him how to talk to and how to be the leader that he should be, because he's young and a lot of these people are way older than he is, but how to be the leader and how to really to develop mature Jesus followers who will engage and do what Jesus said to do. So when we look at the 18th verse, we'll look there first. When we look at the 18th verse, Paul tells Timothy, he said, command them to do good. He's talking about those that are rich. He said to be rich in good deeds. And you'll understand where this is coming from. I am jumping way down in the middle of this, but just to show you where the thought comes from. He said, command them to do good, do something, be about something, be about doing something. And then he said to be rich in good deeds, to be rich in good deeds, not just rich in accumulating money, but using the money that you've accumulated to be rich in good deeds and to be generous and willing to share. So in this chapter, the 6th chapter, I jumped down to the 18th verse to get us started here. But the beginning of this, Paul is talking to two categories of people. And I want to show you who these two categories of people are. He said those who wanted to be rich, he talks about them in the verses above where we were, and those already rich, which he's talking about in the 18th verse. And so when we look at these two categories, many of us, we're in the category where we want to be rich, and maybe we're not already rich, and maybe some of us think that we are already rich. But those of you who want to be rich, which category do you think you're in? If you'll chat that back to me, just which category do you think you're in? Are you in the category that you want to be rich, or are you in the category that you're already rich? Which category do you think that you're in? Thomasine just tweeted, look where God has brought us from. You know, from a mighty long ways, as some of our my ancestors would say, God has brought me from a mighty long ways. And see, I remember, and you're probably looking at me and you're thinking, you're not that old, Woody. And you might even call me by my real name, Hubert. Hubert, you're not that old. But I'm 64 years old, but I've still experienced some things that people that are 64, I think most people that are in their 60s haven't experienced what I experienced when I was younger. And much of what we experienced paints the passion for what we do when we do receive. In other words, many of us, we were so poor that we never want to be anything close to that again. Ever. And we do everything we can to make sure we're not. You know, somebody said that they're in the wannabe rich category. I see several people in the wannabe category, wannabe rich. Well, you know, there's nothing inherently wrong with wanting to be rich. I want you to know that. Some people may, you know, hesitate to say I want to be rich, because they think that that's bad. Because of one of the verses in here, many churches have used this verse to discourage people from increasing their income, increasing their quality of life. But which that verse specifically, we won't go over today, but that verse specifically talks about the love of money as being the root of all evil. And some people have misquoted that and just said that money is the root of all evil. But there's something about the passion for money. And that's not just people who are greedy and rich, but that's for people who are also poor. When we've been poor for so long, as I was talking about, our goal and our attraction to money, once you see what money can do for you, then you get attracted and addicted to it, really. It's an addiction. You get addicted to what money does. And so most of us, believe it or not, and I don't, want to burst your bubble, but most of us are already rich. And when some pastors would say that to you, they say, well, because of who you are in Jesus, because of what Jesus has done for you, he's already paid the price. And he's, the gifts that you have, the things that you do. But if you don't take those gifts that God has given you and actually monetize them, you'll never know that you are rich. But I'm talking about you're rich from another category. Let me show you something here. If you will take a look at your screen, I want you to see this. This is comparing your household income to that of the entire world. When you look at $50,000 in a household of two adults, where two people are earning money, and the average household income is $50,000, do you realize that you are in the richest 4.5% of the global population? You're in the top 5% of all the people in the world as far as how much money you earn. Your income is more than 10 times what the global median income is in the entire world. When you look at everybody in the entire world, people that are richer than you, that means there are only 4.9% of the people in the world that are richer than you are. If you and your household bring in $50,000 a year, only 4.9% people in the entire world are richer than you are. You are more richer than 95% of the people in the world. And this is two adults. If you're single, it's less than this. But we're talking about two adults in a household earning incomes. You are in the richest of the 4.9% of your global population, meaning that you are richer than 95%, more than 95% of the people in your income category. Now, let me show you one more step for this. If you have a household income of $100,000, and that's with two people earning money, and many of you are in this category because you have two earning household incomes, but if you have an income of $100,000, even if you're single, which is push you way above this, but do you realize you're in the top 1%? The top 1% of income earners when you look at global income. The top 1%. So you are already rich. That's really that's my message to you today, is that you are already rich. You have to recognize when you compare what you earn to what everyone else earns that's earning the same kind of money that you are earning, your income is more than, if you make $100,000 a year, your income is more than 20 times the global median. And many of us are somewhere between that 50 and 100. There's some of us that may be less than that. But you can see that you are already rich. So if you want to talk about the category that you're in, whether you want to be rich or whether you're already rich, you are already rich. Most of us are already rich. It's about our psychology of money. And that's what it's really all about, is how money affects our minds, how money affects our hearts, how money affects who we are as a person. And we don't even realize that we're already rich because we're so focused on just me and what I don't have. We focus so much on of me and what I don't have and what others do have. And so we put ourselves in a category where we don't even realize how much we actually do have. So today, I want to back all the way up to the first verse of that 6th chapter of Timothy. And remember, this is just the introduction. So I want to go through this and get you thinking for the rest of this series for the next 4 weeks. Paul is talking to Timothy. Again, this is a church at Ephesus. And the very first verse here says, all who are under the yoke of slavery should consider their masters worthy of full respect. Now, when you start reading this, I know one of the first things you think about, what in the world does this have to do with being rich? What in the world does this have to do with my money? We're just talking about slavery. But the church we have to realize here, Paul is writing a letter to a pastor. He's writing a letter to Timothy, who's a young pastor. And in their economy, in that day, they had slaves. And there were slave owners who had become Christians. And there were slaves who would become Christians. And so Paul is talking to Timothy as a pastor as to how to deal with all of those. Now, when you read this, for example, Paul says, he's telling Timothy, he said, all who are under the yoke of slavery, all those who are still enslaved, who are still slaves, should consider their master worthy of full respect, so that God's name and our teaching may not be slandered. So the church is Paul realizes that the church is God's primary vehicle for getting his work done in the earth. And so if he's going to get his work done in the earth, the church can't be a place that creates contention where we stir up riots and revolutions and all that. Paul is saying the best way to get this done is through individuals. And I'll tell you how I really feel about this in a minute. But Paul, who's writing this to Timothy, he's telling Timothy how to conduct himself as a pastor. You're a pastor, you have slaves in your church, and you have slave owners in your church. And what you need to realize is that each one of them have a place, that they each need to be respected. What he's really saying is everybody needs to respect everybody. And I'm going to show you later that what Paul is talking about, is he's not condoning slavery, but I'll show you that in a minute. But he's teaching Timothy, and he's telling Timothy to teach those in the church how they should conduct themselves as mature Jesus followers. Jesus followers should conduct themselves in a certain way, whether you are an employee, whether you're an employer. You need to respect each other and conduct yourself in certain ways. So let's look at the 8th verse here. He said, Paul is talking to Timothy in this letter. He said, we know that the law is good if one uses it properly. And we also know that the law is made not for the righteous, but for lawbreakers and rebels. So he's telling Timothy, here are the people that we're talking to, that you should be talking about. And this particular scripture here is, is you're probably not ready for what this is about to tell you. But look at this and just go one line by line as we move through this and watch what happens here. He said, Paul is telling Timothy, the law is not for people who are abiding by the law. The law is for people who don't abide by the law. And he starts to name off some of those people who do not abide by the law. So the law is not for the righteous, but it's for lawbreakers. It's for rebels. And some people have erroneously used this scripture to debate about God's position or even Paul's position on owning slaves. But Paul makes this clear later on. But let's move through this as we hear what Paul is saying to Timothy. He continues down his list of who the law is for. It's for the ungodly. It's for the sinful. It's for the unholy. It's for the irreligious. It's for those who killed their fathers or killed their mothers. It's for murderers. That's who the law is for. And he continues on down the list and he says it's for the sexually immoral. It's for those practicing homosexuality. It's for slave traders and liars and perjurers and for whatever else is contrary to sound doctrine. So don't miss it. Did you get it? Did you see the point that I wanted to make? See, Paul is saying even slave traders are in that list of people who the law is made for. They're breaking the law. They're breaking God's law, the law of God's heart, even if the laws before that allowed them to have slaves. So don't miss this. Paul is not condoning slavery. Paul is actually condemning slave trading. So the key is your response, though. It's your response, which means your responsibility, regardless to what category you're in. Your responsibility as a Christian, if you're either of those. The church needs a reputation of the heart of Christ. It needs a reputation of a heart full of love. It needs a reputation of a heart that's full of grace, where we actually engage and be a blessing to people instead of, ruling over people. So, and that's all free, because that really has nothing to do with this about slavery. I just wanted to share that with you because it's in the context of what Paul is telling Timothy what he should be doing and how he is to deal with these people. So he tells him, those who have believing masters, should not show them disrespect just because they're fellow believers. And he said, in other words, you're learning to trust God in this. God is working in the hearts of masters. God is working in the hearts of slave owners. God is working who become Christians, become Jesus followers. So he's telling you, if you're a Jesus follower now and you've been a slave, don't disrespect them because they are becoming, and you want them to become, fellow believers. He says to them, instead, they should serve them even better because their masters are dear to them as fellow believers and are devoted to the welfare of their slaves. It takes time for the Jesus movement, the Jesus followers movement, the Christian movement. It had to give time for the culture to change through the hearts of the people, not through a system. That's what I really wanted to share with this part of this verse. See, we lean a lot on legislation and changing laws, but not hearts. See, legislation, that changing laws and all of that, it doesn't change people. It doesn't change hearts. And until hearts are changed, the culture stays the same. And so we are looking for politicians to make changes that will change our culture, change the way we feel about each other. And with all the bickering and everything that's going on now, you can see it only makes it worse when we try to use the government to do things that we should be doing from our hearts, especially those of us who are Jesus followers. If you're a Jesus follower, you can help change the culture by being loved, by demonstrating giving, by demonstrating the heart of Jesus, the heart of God, right from your own heart. There may need to be law there, and I'm not saying that we don't need any laws. We do need laws, but until hearts change, the culture will not change. The culture will be the same. So look at what Paul says here. He said, these are the things that you are to teach and insist on as a leader. You are the leader, Timothy. You are to insist on this. If anyone teaches anything other than what I'm telling you here that does not agree with sound instruction, sound doctrine, or with the teachings of what Jesus has been teaching and godly teaching, if anybody teaches anything else, he says they are conceited and they understand nothing. They don't understand anything about the heart of God. They don't understand anything about what God is really trying to do in the earth. They have an unhealthy interest in controversies. They have an unhealthy interest in quarrels. They have an unhealthy interest about words that result in envy. It's just a word game to them. They are not interested in change. They're not interested in what's the betterment for everyone. They're interested, it's just for strife. It's for malicious talk. It's for evil suspicion. And he goes on and he goes on and on. He says, and then constant friction between people of corrupt minds. And don't you see this playing out in our political arenas today? Just exactly this is what plays out instead of what God really wants us to do. He says, who have been robbed. He said, these people who are doing all of this, and these are their thoughts, who have been robbed of the truth, robbed of the reality of what God's trying to do, robbed of the truth, and who think that godliness is a means to financial gain. And this is the point where I am trying to get to today. All of these people, he said, they think that godliness is a means to financial gain. They're not interested in change. They believe that godliness is a way to increase your quality of living, to become rich. Being godly is a way to become rich. Now, how many of you, many of us, I'll ask the question anyway, how many of you have felt like if I could be more godly, and you've been taught that, if you could be more godly, then you could actually, you should expect God to actually increase you. If you are obeying the scriptures, if you're obeying what God said to do, and you use your faith, how many of you have heard that? But godliness is a means to financial gain. Do you realize that when Paul was saying this to Timothy, that almost every Jew in the world, especially at those at this time in history, have been raised this way? They have been raised to believe that they were blessed by keeping the law. They have been raised to believe that keeping the law and living godly equals blessing. And even today, when you ask, if I were to ask you, how many broke Jews do you know? How many broke Jewish people do you know? How many wealthy Jewish people do you know? And you would probably see that, the blessings follow, it seems like, those who are following God's law. But here's what we have migrated to. What we've migrated to is not so much of keeping the law. What we've migrated to is faith. We're saying use your faith. In other words, not keeping the law, but since it's not made by the law today, it's what you can do with your faith. My faith got me this, and living godly got me this. If I use my faith, that's what equals to blessings. If I use my faith and live godly, then I can expect God to do this for me. If I live by faith, work my faith, pray and believe, then God is obligated to bless me. Well, there's no scripture that tells you about obligation for God. It's really God works by grace. And what Paul was battling here was the false teachers, and that's who he's preparing Timothy for. The false teachers who were using religion for their own financial gain. That's what he was saying. They were using religion for it. And we have many people today, TV evangelists today, that are doing exactly the same thing. Their goal is to increase their offerings. In other words, if you have faith and you live godly, it equals blessings. And that's what they tell the people. Name it and claim it, and give and you'll receive. Give to me, they're saying, and you'll receive. Give to the church and you'll receive. Use your faith to get it. How many of you have heard that? I mean, that's been the way we have lived. We've organized our life that way. We've organized our life to believe that if I could just live godly, use my faith, and pray and believe God for the blessings, then I can name it and claim it, and it should be mine. Well, look at what Paul said next. Remember what he said earlier. He said, they think that godliness is a means to financial gain. That's the same thing we just talked about. We think that our faith and living godly is a means to increase in finances, increase our net worth, increase our quality of living. But look at what Paul said. Instead of godliness being a means to financial gain, he said, but godliness with contentment is great gain. Godliness with contentment. Now, so what are you talking about? Godliness with contentment. Godliness with contentment. And he gives a little qualifier here with the rest of that verse. He said, for we brought nothing into the world and we can take nothing out of the world. In other words, you're not taking anything out of here with you. And because you didn't bring anything with you, you didn't bring anything. You were born naked. That's the way Job said it. You were born naked and you're going to leave naked. Even if people put clothes on you, you're going to end up naked. And godliness with contentment is what brings you great gain. If you can, before I say that, let me show you what I'm really saying, because this is the way I laid it out for myself. Contentment with godliness is a challenge for our do more and then get more and then be more cycle that never ends. It's a cycle. When you earn some money, see, I can remember, when in the early 70s, I mean, I've worked all my life. I can remember even when I was 8, 9 years old, and we were chopping cotton and picking cotton, and I would make $2 a day. Based on that, and that's one reason why a lot of families had a lot of kids. If you had 10 kids, you can make $20 a day. But, so I can go all the way back. And when you have that kind of background and you see where you have come from, it's very easy when you do more and you get more that you feel like you are more because you did more, you got more, and now I am more. And that when we look at godliness with contentment, it challenges that concept. It challenges that mindset because we are who we are. This cycle never ends. We are who we are because of what God is doing in our lives. In other words, I don't believe that God ever intended for there to be a direct relationship between what you do and what you earn without trusting him in the middle. There never was God's intended relation. There was never his intention for there to be a direct relationship to planting and reaping, even if you're talking about harvesting. I mean, what you do to plant and reaping, God is in the middle of that. And what you're doing to earn income, whether you're working for someone else, whether it's your own business, whether it's an idea, that's the planning part. And God never intended for you to just feel like because I did this that I'm going to get this without him in the middle, without trusting him in the middle of that process. Contentment is not just being satisfied with what you have. It's being willing to share what you have because God is your source. When you see God as your source, then you realize whatever I have, there's more where that came from. But when you see what you do as your source, then you feel like I have to keep doing this. And if someone take this earning potential away from me, then I have no way of actually receiving anything. But when you put God in the middle, nobody can stop you from earning money. Nobody can stop you with the ideas that you have in your head that God helps you to do. All you have to do is monetize them and find a way to do that. So contentment is not just being satisfied with what you have. It's being willing to share with what you have because God is your source. So here's your challenge for this week in the beginning of this. Remember, this is just the introduction. So there's much more that we could say about this, but this is just an introduction today. I can't say it all today. Gotta, save some for. This is enough to think about today. Your challenge, here's your challenge. Your challenge is to take the necessary steps. Please take the necessary steps to avoid the negative impact of the psychology of money and prosperity. It has a way, money has a way of moving your hope from the one who provided you with whatever you have to get the money to whatever the money gets for you. And if you don't intentionally grab your hope and move it back to God on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, if you don't have something in place that, harnesses that hope and bring it back to the original source, you will find yourself worrying about the next step. Who could take this from you? What if this doesn't happen? What is that going to happen? But your challenge this week is to take the necessary steps. And that's up to you. Everybody's steps may be different, so I can't tell you what those steps are. But your challenge is to take the necessary steps to avoid the negative impact of the psychology of money and prosperity. In other words, do what is required not to allow the pursuit of wealth or any expected blessing itself to become your compulsive habit. See, money creates a habit. It creates a habit of earning and a habit of spending. You create the habit of spending when you have more. And be honest, and I'm in this category, my hand is up. How many of you have a tendency to spend more when you earn more? And that if you don't do something to change that, that's a normal tendency. You spend more when you have more. And that's why I try to teach young people today, start some kind of savings, start some kind of some way of accumulation of what you have instead of just living off of everything that you have. That's why our motto here and our model, even when we receive offerings, it's always give and save and live. So give to God first, which puts him in the middle of all of your transactions or whatever you're doing, earning to earn. But then save some for yourself. Don't spend all of your money, but then save some for later and then live off the rest. So what I'm saying to you today is do what is required not to allow the pursuit of wealth or any expected blessing from God itself to become your compulsive habit. So here's some questions that I have. So I don't have a lot of directions, but I have some questions that you need to ask yourself that will give you direction, because each of us have different things going on in our lives with our money. So questions to ask yourself that will help keep the main thing the main thing. When you're looking at concerning your money, when you're looking at God being your source, it's easy to say that when someone asks you, But then when you're in the middle of earning, in the middle of a deal that doesn't seem to be happening, then how difficult is it for you to remember that God is your source? We start worrying. We start making different decisions. A lot of people, even pastors and especially TV evangelists, they do things that start to try to trick people, and maybe they don't call it a trick, but they're tricking people to give more money so that they'll end up with the money. I am, and I'll probably share some of my disappointment with some of my, people that are as pastors, especially TV evangelists, some of the things that they're doing, even with COVID, using things that will just bring them more money, increase them. And that's not what it's all about. So here's your first action step here. First question to ask yourself: what is one thing that you can do this week to avoid the adverse side effects of earning more or having more money? You see, if you're going to increase in money, you need to prepare to do something with the more. Or if you don't, the more will find a place. If you don't, people who are advertising, people who have other businesses, other pastors, other ministers, TV evangelists, they'll find a way to get it. And you'll find yourself, giving that money away. What is one thing that you can do this week to avoid the adverse side effects of earning more or having more money? That's the first question. And then the second question is this: what would it look like for you this year? If you thought about it from now till next year this time, what would it look like for you this year to be extravagantly generous? In other words, it's not just about your money, but generosity is about your time. What would it look like for you to give someone a timely gift, to just using your time, focusing on being a blessing to someone else, to actually, making someone else's life better with your time? It's not just about money, it's about helping people. What would it look like for you this year if you just extravagantly helped somebody? You just, whatever it took to be the help that they needed, you decided you were going to make sure it happened. Even if you couldn't personally provide it, you wanted to make sure that you were going to champion this cause and make sure it happened. Just help, making sure the person got the help they needed. What would it look like this year if you extravagantly did that? What would it look like this year if you extravagantly use your kindness? You see, generosity is about being kind to people. If you just use your kindness to be a blessing to people, what would it look like if you extravagantly were kind? What would it look like if you extravagantly used whatever resources you had? That's what we're talking about. What would it look like? And look at that. That's the question you need to ask yourself, not just now, but for the next year. What would that look like? And then the third question is this, and this is a heavy one right here. What kind of person would I be if I suddenly acquired more money? In other words, how would money change you? And you may think, this is why you need to think about this. It's not for you to tell me. This is for you to answer for yourself. What kind of person would I become if I suddenly acquired more money? If someone, dropped $100,000 today and told you that you were going to get $100,000 every second year for the next 10 years, how would that change your life? It would change your life, right? What kind of person would you be? And you need to decide that now if you're going to be the kind of person you want to be. And then the other question is, the other side of that question is, what if I suddenly earn significantly less money than I am now? What kind of person would I become? What kind of person would I be if I didn't have the money and the income that I have now? These questions will help you to pursue what you're pursuing. It'll help you to be the kind of person that you need to be. It'll help you deal with and avoid the adverse side effects of earning more money, because I believe you should increase and earn more money. But here's the deal. Remember this: godliness plus contentment is what equals great gain. Godliness plus contentment. In other words, contentment is not about just being satisfied with what you have, but contentment is knowing that God is your source and whatever I have, there's more. I am just an avenue. I am a distribution. I'm a place where God can distribute his grace. I'm a place where God can distribute his love, his kindness. I'll use my money to do the same. And I'm just a distribution center for what God wants done in the earth. If more people thought like this, if more people actually demonstrated this, instead of just trying to get their party in the office to vote for whatever they think they want, then we would deal with and change the culture instead of trying to change the laws to change people. The hearts of people would change, and then the communities would change, and therefore the need for the laws would change. So this is it. Remember, godliness plus contentment is great gain. And I do want to pray for some people today, but I want to give you the opportunity also to share. And so I'm going to come back. I am going to pray because some of us are struggling with what we just talked about today. So I am going to pray, and then I'm going to come back and give you a means and a way to actually give your normal offering, give to the church, but also to give to the Extravagant Generosity Campaign that we're talking about. So bow your heads with me, if you would, please. Father, we thank you for this message today. We thank you for this season, this time of the year, where it's our goal and our desire to be a blessing to those who need us, who maybe just don't have the same means that we have. They don't have the same maturity in finances that we have. They're lacking certain things. And so, Father, I just pray that each person that's hearing me today, as we deal with our own situation and how we are dealing with money, how we look to money, and the psychology of money, that you will help us with our mindset so that we will engage you in the middle of everything that we're doing, realizing that you are our source, and therefore whatever I have, there's more where that came from because of you. And so we honor you, give ourselves to you as a vessel to use in all of this. In Jesus' name, amen. I'm going to give you an opportunity to give right now because I want to show you where you can give to that particular specific need of our community today. But if you go to our website, click on Give, and follow the promptings there, you'll get to a category where you can put in a category whether you want to give tithes and offerings, whether you want to give to the general fund. But one of those selections that you can select is if you desire to give to the Extravagant Generosity Campaign. And if you would just give, and we're asking for $39.95 there. And so we're asking everybody to do that. We're going to do this for the next 3-4 weeks in total and all. So that and everything that's collected in that fund will go towards those groups of people that we talked about today, to our nonprofit partners. We support them throughout the year, but this is the one time when we focus and do a campaign. There are many of you, and I thank you, there are many of you who choose to give monthly for this, and you've been doing that, religiously. Thank you for doing that. You've increased your tithes and your offerings to make sure that you're giving to this fund monthly for that particular purpose. But however you're doing that, even if you're mailing in a gift, just make a note on there that it's for the Extravagant Generosity Campaign, and then it'll get to the right place. Many of you use our app. The same thing is available there. If you use the church app, to go there and do that. And many of you, you give by texting. You can just text the number 84321 and you'll receive a link, but you have to find Grace Transformational Ministries as your church. And then once you do that, then you can select to give there. But we do want to thank you for supporting Grace Transformational Ministries, those of you who support the church itself, your financial assistance and your generosity without doing these campaigns. That's what really gets us through. It's the people who constantly give week after week, month after month. But there are people who will give towards this campaign who don't normally give throughout the month or throughout the year. And we want to give everybody, all of our family, all of our friends, an opportunity to actually help us support these organizations in our neighborhood and also in Kenya, those that we represent, those that we support there. Just to give you that list again, that list of partners is Carriagetown Ministries, Reconnections, Catholic Charities, St. Dunstan's Episcopal Church, and other small nonprofits, and Christ Fearless Faith Ministries, which is their Joy Note Children's Home is who we are supporting there. So if you would like to give, then find that link, go to our website and do that, and you can give right there and do that.